Welcome to Fantasia, home of the Melodious. My name's Azallea, and today, gonna be bringing you guys another playtesting video. Now this time, we are gonna be taking a look at my pure Melodious deck. Now before we begin, I just want to let you guys know that I've changed up my setup so that you guys can actually see the entire playmat, so I have more space to work with and things will look a little less cluttered on the screen. And you guys might have also noticed that I'm currently recording this commentary in post, which means you're going to get better audio to complement the better video quality as well. So the direction that I want to take this series in is a more relaxed and laid back style where you guys can kind of just sit back and enjoy the plays that are going to happen on screen. Alright, so please let me know in the comment section down below if you have any suggestions that you would like me to try and implement, but without any further ado, let's just jump right into this. Alright guys, so let's go ahead and take a look at our first 5 cards in our opening hand. I hope you guys like the aesthetic setup that I have going on right here. Okay, so let's take a look at the cards that we ended up drawing. We have Pot of Desires, First Movement Solo, Transmodify, Monster Reborn, and Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. This is actually a pretty strong hand. So the first thing that I'm going to do is activate the First Movement Solo from my hand because I don't really have any monsters to establish on my side of the field, and of course because we're playing pure Melodious, Aria the Melodious Diva is going to be our monster of choice. So First Movement Solo is definitely going to summon her out, and I'm going to be very careful to place her not under the extra monster zones. So I'm going to summon her to the far left side of the field. And if you haven't noticed by now, the female Robin that's currently at the top of the screen, she is going to act as my field center, so the 2 zones that are right next to her are going to be the extra monster zones. Anyway, now that I've shuffled my deck after using First Movement Solo, I'm gonna go ahead and activate Pot of Desires. Now this lets me see more cards in my deck. I actually get to draw 2 cards at the cost of just banishing the top 10 from my deck. And in this deck, which is fairly slow, these 10 cards are cards that you probably would have not seen before the duel has ended anyway, so this is actually very cost efficient. Alright, so it looks like we banished a couple of Melodious monsters, but we didn't banish all copies of any of them, which is actually fairly good. This makes it so that we have a bunch of plays that are left open to us in the deck, with Soprano, Sonata, Cannon, and so on and so forth. So it looks like the 2 cards that we drew were a copy of Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit and a Raigeki. So these 2 cards are definitely fantastic. Ghost Ogre for disruption against my opponent, and Raigeki for my next turn where I can go ahead and board wipe my opponent's board. So now the next thing I'm going to do is activate the Transmodify, sending the Aria the Melodious Diva from my field to the graveyard to summon Elegy the Melodious Diva out from my deck. You really want to tutor out Elegy as soon as possible in situations like this, just to minimize the chances of drawing into her. Now of course we were lucky that we didn't get to banish the Elegy from the deck with our Pot of Desires, but if it does happen, your Transmodifies are still going to be live, and you can use them on your Sonatas to bring out something like Soprano. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and use the Monster Reborn to summon out the Aria back from the graveyard and onto our side of the field. And that basically does it for that opening hand. Our Aria is going to stay on the field. You can put her in defense position if you would like to, but that is up to you. Alright, so for our second opening hand, it looks like we open with Monster Reborn, First Movement Solo, Aria, Sonata, and Mistake. This is also a fairly strong hand, especially because Mistake is a fantastic floodgate for this format. So I'm going to start off just like I did with the last opening hand, and I'm going to activate my First Movement Solo, and this is going to allow me to tutor out the Soprano, the Melodious Diva, Melodious Songstress, my bad, from my deck, and summon her to my side of the field. Now Soprano can open up things like fusion plays for us, which is going to be very nice. Of course, First Movement Solo locks us to only summoning Melodious monsters for the rest of this turn, so we aren't able to go for XYZs or anything like that. So I'm going to activate Soprano's effect on the field after I normal summon the Aria, and now we're going to be able to go ahead and summon Schuberta, the Melodious Maestra, from our extra deck, and summon her to one of our extra monster zones. Now Schuberta is very good disruption, especially against decks like Sky Strikers, where they're trying to fill up the graveyard with a bunch of spell cards to get value out of their engage. Now we're going to activate the Monster Reborn just like we did last time, and this Monster Reborn is of course going to bring back the Aria the Melodious Diva back from my graveyard, and I'm going to summon her in the leftmost monster zone. Aria is going to provide Shiberta the targeting protection that she needs in order to survive, and I'm going to set the Mistake, and now we are good to go. I still have a Sonata left in the hand, which means that next turn I can boost up the attack of Shiberta and then deal some necessary damage to potentially attack over their field. Okay, so now we're taking a look at our third opening hand, and we see we have Sonata, Cannon, Ghost Ogre, Mistake, and Storming Mirror Force. This is a very trap-heavy hand, but that means that we have a lot more control available to us. So unfortunately we don't have access to a very strong board in terms of monster presence, but we can go ahead and set the Cannon, which has 2000 defense, and then go ahead and set the Storming Mirror Force and the Mistake to our side of the field. Mistake will be a great floodgate against our opponent, and Storming Mirror Force can help us prevent a huge board from attacking into us. We also have that Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit in our hand, so that we can potentially go ahead and disrupt our opponent further on their turn. Alright, so for the next opening hand, we're going to draw 5 cards yet again, and take a look at what we have here. So, luckily for us, we open with First Movement Solo, Mistake, Transmodify, Storming Mirror Force, and another copy of Mistake. So having 2 copies of Mistake is actually pretty good. You only really want to have one active at a time, but if your opponent decides to destroy one of them, you can go ahead and chain your second copy of Mistake, so that they can basically just not search for the rest of the turn. Anyway. Okay, so first things first, we're going to go ahead and activate our First Movement Solo to go ahead and summon the Aria the Melodious Diva out from our deck to my side of the field. Now, you don't always have to put her in the leftmost monster zone. This is just a habit of mine that I've been getting into. You just want to make sure that she's never summoned above the extra monster zone. Now I'm going to set both copies of Mistake and my Storming Mirror Force, and that's basically going to be it, and I'll pass the turn off to my opponent. Now it's important to note that I do have a Transmodify in my hand, and that could potentially be used if I draw into something like a Sonata or any other level 4 monsters, which allows me to either go into my fusion plays or go into my Elegy, which is both pretty good options. Now, for my next opening hand, I have Monster Reborn, Raigeki, Sonata, Transmodify, and Pot of Desire. So this is also a really strong opening hand, and if you were going second, it would be even better because then your Raigeki would be live. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and activate my Pot of Desires, and we're going to go ahead and banish the top 10 cards of the deck to draw 2 more. Now, the reason why I didn't go for the Sonata and Transmodify play immediately is because I don't really mind if I banish a copy or 2 of Soprano that's in my deck. The chances of banishing all 3 of them are fairly low, and even if I do, I still have the option to go ahead and Transmodify into something like Aria to establish a more defensive field. So looking at the cards that I banished 1 copy of Soprano, 2 copies of Cannon, and everything else is pretty much negligible, so that was actually a very strong Pot of Desires. Now looking at the hand and the cards that I drew into a copy of Cannon and a copy of Mistake, so that is actually very, very strong. The Pot of Desires has been coming through, especially through these playtesting hands. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is probably go ahead and summon out the Sonata from my hand, and that will allow me to go ahead and Transmodify into something like Soprano. Now when Soprano is special summoned from my deck, I can go ahead and activate her effect to target the Sonata that's currently in my graveyard and add her back to my hand. And remember earlier with our Pot of Desires that we drew a Cannon the Melodious Diva off of that as well. So I have the option of either summoning the Cannon from my hand or the Sonata. And in this case, I've decided to go ahead and special summon the Cannon the Melodious Diva out from my hand to my side of the field to use as fusion material with my Soprano, and the reason why I did that is because Sonata can actually boost up the attack of my Shiberta during my next turn if I want to attack over something that, you know, could possibly have 3000 attack. So I'm going to go ahead and summon the Shiberta in my extra monster zone, saving the Sonata in my hand for a later turn. Now I also drew into a copy of Mistake earlier, so I'm going to go ahead and set that to my side of the field. Floodgates are of course very potent in this metagame, especially something like Mistake that can prevent my opponent from going for a bunch of searches. Now the remaining cards in my hand include Sonata, Monster Reborn, and Raigeki, so I have board wipes, I have Revival, and I have a follow-up play on my next turn. Okay, so going into the next opening hand, I'm gonna draw 5 more cards and see what we have this time. So you won't always open up with a fantastic hand that can combo off, as we see in this case, Potted Desires, Ash Blossom, Mistake, Solemn Strike, and Sonata. So the only monster we really have is Sonata, but luckily we did draw into the Pot of Desires, which will allow us to dig through our deck and see 2 more cards. So I'm going to go ahead and banish the top 10 cards of my deck, and then put 2 aside that I'm going to draw later. Okay, so let's go ahead and put the Desires into the graveyard and then take a look at the cards that we banished. So we see things like Hand Traps, we see Elegy, more Desires, a few more Melodious cards, and 2 Storming Mirror Force. So overall, this was a very strong banish. Even though we got rid of the Elegy, it doesn't really matter. It's actually pretty good, which means that we won't actually be drawing into her this turn with the Desires, so that's kind of nice. We drew into an Aria, the Melodious Diva, and Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. Ghost Ogre, of course, is fantastic disruption for our hand, and we drew into the Aria that we can set to our side of the field. There's no reason to just normal summon her out. It's better to keep the opponent guessing by keeping it face down. Now we're going to set our 2 back row to our side of the field, and that is going to be basically it for this opening hand. There's really not much else to it. So the rest of the cards that are in our hand include an Ash Blossom and a Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit for disruption, and we have a Sonata for our following turn. If our Aria survives, we can special summon her out and start poking our opponent for some damage. Okay guys, so let's go ahead and take a look at our last opening hand. We're gonna go ahead and draw 5 more cards. So right off the bat I can see an Ash Blossom, a Ghost Ogre, 2 Ghost Ogres actually, with a cannon and a Pot of Desires. So Pot of Desires seems to be a very clutch card in this video, especially because we're getting so much value out of it. Even though we're banishing 10 cards, the 2 cards that we draw definitely outweigh the cost of banishing 10 cards. So speaking of which, we're going to go ahead and banish the top 10 cards with our Desires to go ahead and draw 2 more cards from our deck. Pot Desires is coming in very clutch, and it is definitely a very valuable asset to this deck. So it looks like we didn't really banish too much with this Pot Desires, which is actually pretty good. Now, taking a look at the 2 cards that we drew 2 copies of Soprano, and that's actually not too bad. It gives us more options for this turn and for our following turn as well. So we're going to go ahead and use the Soprano that we just drew into and normal summon her to our side of the field. Now that we control Melodious Monster, special summon the Cannon, the Melodious Diva out from our hand, and then follow up that with a Soprano's Fusion Summon effect to go ahead and Fusion Summon into Shiberta, the Melodious Maestra, and we're going to summon her into our extra monster zone. Now Shiberta again is very good disruption against our opponent, so even if you just have Shiberta on your side of the field, it is completely fine. In this case, we are also backed up with Ghost Ogre and Ash Blossom in the hand, so we are looking very solid. Anyway guys, that does it for all of the playtesting hands in this video. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed it or found it helpful, please leave a like, subscribe for more Melodious content, and leave a comment down below letting me know what I can do to improve. And until next time, take care.